Hi, it's Heather. Welcome to the part of the module about finding data. Finding data is a lot easier than it used to be thanks to the internet and also more and more to open data movements and the ideas of transparency and accountability in research and data. Because of that, many more non-academic individuals and organizations have access to all kinds of really interesting data. Where to find the data? Of course, the most obvious place to start is Google. If you have a topic, you enter the topic into Google, usually with the word data, and there you go. You have some results. We're going to use an example of refugee data. I'm doing quite a lot of work right now on how to understand and support and put in place policies for refugee resettlement using data. So data science for refugee resettlement is one of the projects I'm doing a lot of work on right now. So we'll say that we want to find some data. So we'll Google refugee data, and this is what we get. However, if you make a few small changes to your Google search, so if you use file type XLS, that's telling Google that you're only looking for files that are Excel sheets. So immediately it ignores everything that's not an Excel sheet. And an Excel sheet is usually a very good place to start because much data is stored in Excel sheets. Other extensions to try or other file types to try are CSVs or the fancier, newer versions of Excel like XLS. So if we go to the file type XLS results and we look at this page, we see the state of Virginia is collecting data on refugees. That's very interesting. That did not come up when we searched without file type. I mean, it probably came up in the results, but it would have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages back. So here right on page 2, we have a very interesting piece of data on refugees. Looks like the state of Virginia is keeping very careful public data on refugees that settle in Virginia and where they came from, and also even what type of refugees they are. That is very cool. Could we show the flow of refugees by state? That would be a very interesting data journalism piece. So then we go to the next page, and here is protection incident monitoring inventory. I'm not sure what that is, but it came up as refugee data. If we take a look, it looks very interesting. One of the useful things about pieces of documents like this is that it tells you what other people are tracking. It tells you what data points and variables and indicators are important to people working on the ground in your story area. So in this case, on the ground with refugees. Here we have a semi-public website. That's very interesting. Semi-public is very interesting. Might be a good source or it might be a good lead, something unusual. Children, there's an interesting topic you might want to consider if you're going to work on refugees. And transgender, that's also very interesting. So you can see how finding data really does contribute to the iterative process. Simply the act of looking for data will often help you form possible angles for stories, build a foundation of understanding of your topic. This is a very important process, and this data here has a lot of metadata. We'll be talking more about metadata very soon. Metadata is data about your data, information about your data. So that's very important. We'll spend a lot of time on that shortly. Now if we use the CSV file type, we see that again, we get the data to show up much more quickly, and oftentimes data from sources that you might not ever see. I've had very interesting data come up from things like school board meetings where everything is public, but it's not really published, and it certainly isn't published in a way that's easy to find. So searching by file type is very useful. Another very useful trick is searching in images. This seems counterintuitive. You want data, but one of the very important aspects of data and data journalism, as our colleague Alberto Cairo knows quite well, data visualization is very important right now. So by searching in the images section for refugee data, we will probably find people who are working with data on refugees and analyzing it in interesting ways. This doesn't mean that you should take all of this to be truth. There's lots of bad visualizations and poorly done visualizations. However, it can be very helpful if you are extremely careful. Here is the Visual Loop website, which is doing something interesting with refugee data. We can't really understand what they're doing from here, but if we follow the link, we end up with some very interesting sources that are using data about refugees to answer questions. The New York Times is here, several other popular publications, some much less known publications, and also things that aren't in English, because we're searching in images here, not in English. So that can be a very good lead of where to find some unusual and important data that you might not otherwise find anywhere. So after Google search, the next obvious thing to do is data repositories. Now, some data repositories are indexed by Google, which means their results will show up in your Google searches. But many, many, many data repositories are not indexed by Google, which means they won't show up. So you need to go specifically to the data repository and search there. In the course materials, we've provided a list of many different data repositories that we know about and use. And one of the great things about a MOOC is that you can go and make your own contributions, so we can all learn from you and find new data sources from you. Here's a couple of examples. NICAR maintains a database that has some very interesting things in it. You'll want to note that some of the data in this data repository is free and some of it you pay for. That's also true of ProPublica. ProPublica has an outstandingly good data store. It's not very big, but the data it has there is very, very good quality and answers some very interesting questions. Some of that data is free and some of that data you would need to pay for. I have paid for data here, and it's always worth the money. Here's Enigma, which catalogs a lot of publicly available data in interesting ways. And if we use this for some refugee data, we'll find Al-Qaeda and Texas budgets. That's interesting. These are pieces of data that you would find if you search through 100 pages of Google search results. But this makes it easier. And it also gives you some ideas of angles that you might be able to take with data that you hadn't thought of before. Open data is a very important source, although it's usually not the best source. The data is usually okay, but the data that they make public often won't answer the questions that you need. So feel free to Google anything you want, open data, you'll get it all there. But there is this thing called the Dataverse, which was developed at Harvard, but many of them exist throughout the world today. And within the Dataverse, researchers and academics, anyone who's collecting their own data is uploading their data to these Dataverses. Transparency and reproducibility in research has become a very important part of our modern research process. So in order to facilitate that, researchers who use data to do research have to make their data available so that you can check to see if their results are real, which is fantastic. And it also allows you to use that data to use as a source for other stories. So feel free to use the data. After you've exhausted those, there's a few other ways to get data. One of them is reading reports really carefully. So if you have usually a PDF report from an organization that is studying or advocating in your topic, in our example, it's refugees. If you read these reports really carefully, there's usually little teeny tiny links to the data. So here's an example of the OECD migration report. If you look way down here, you'll see an example of the link. If you click that link, you'll get an Excel spreadsheet, and that Excel spreadsheet will have all of the data that's behind the report. Now, it won't have the micro data, but it'll have the summarized tables. And oftentimes, some of these tabs are tables that are not included in this PDF. They're sort of behind the scenes analysis that they did, but maybe were too complicated to report on. And those are gold in terms of data journalism. If you really can't find your data anywhere, then you can scrape it. There's a couple of different ways to scrape data. Import.io, or Import.io, I think is how you say it, is a great website that we use quite a lot. It's very logical, has a quick, intuitive way to work with it. You need to practice for a little while, and then you can get data off of any website that has data. Or if you want to learn how to code or hire someone to code, you can scrape data from almost any website that has data that's either publicly available or hidden kind of in the depths of the website. If you're going to scrape data or use data that's a little bit hard to find, it's very good to take some time to think about the ethics. There's no single consensus on exactly what the ethics are of using data that's semi-public, as we saw in that link, or that's scraped. Many people will say if it's on the internet, then it is public and it's usable. That's fine, but that's not legally written in anybody's code of ethics that I'm aware of. Please feel free to add things in the discussion if you're aware of an official answer, but I think there's many different perspectives on what data is actually free to use and what data isn't. It's very important to read the user terms and conditions on any website where you're scraping data or any report that you're taking data from. It's also really important to look at the robots.txt file. This is only if you're going to scrape data. If you're going to scrape data, you need to look at the robots.txt file at the root of the website, because that will basically tell you which parts you are and are not allowed to scrape. And there's a very, very good article here on the ethics, a big conversation about the ethics of scraping data. If you're using data that's in a report or that's easily downloadable as an Excel spreadsheet from somebody's website, you're on very solid ethical grounds. However, if you're scraping website, you might want to take some time to think about what you're doing and who it could expose and the consequences of that. So this module has shown you many different ways to find data: Google searches, special Google searches, looking carefully at reports, and scraping data. Our very next module is going to show you, once you have that data, how to understand that data just before you start working with it. Thanks a lot.